So with the plugs out of the way, we're going to go ahead and start today with a story about the climate crisis, which, as I say every time I cover it, seems to get worse every time I cover it, or seems to, we're crossing more lines of no return or finding out that things are worse than we thought. This is in Common Dreams. It's by Brett Wilkins. Racing at top speed towards global catastrophe, NOAA says CO2 levels highest in human history. We have known about this for half a century and have failed to do anything meaningful about it, said one NOAA researcher. What's it going to take for us to wake up? There is more carbon dioxide in Earth's atmosphere than at any time in the past 4 million years, as the world's continued dependence on fossil fuels keeps humanity hurtling towards a global catastrophe, officials at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration warned on Friday. NOAA reports its Mauna Loa Atmospheric Baseline Observatory in Hawaii measured CO2 levels averaging 420.99 parts per million in May, an increase of 1.8 parts per million over levels at this time last year, while scientists at the San Diego-based Scripps Institute for Oceanography, which also tracks atmospheric CO2, calculated a monthly average of 420.78. Quote, the science is irrefutable. Humans are altering our climate in ways that our economy and our infrastructure must adapt to, NOAA Administrator Rick Spinrad said in a statement. We can see the impacts of climate change around us every day. The relentless increase of carbon dioxide measured at Mauna Loa is a stark reminder that we need to take urgent, serious steps towards climate resiliency and action, he added. So again, you guys, it's not good news as it pertains to the climate, and I wish that this was getting more attention. I feel like a fucking broken record on this one, but it is absolutely astounding to me that we do not pay more attention to something that literally affects everything. There is nothing that matters if we don't have a habitable planet to live on, you guys. Nothing. I apologize for my voice, and I'm all stuffed up. I got a cold, and so I apologize if I sound weird today. Transition here into another climate story. This is about Biden's and his administration's continuing pushback on any sort of, significant climate action. There is a very creative lawsuit that has made its way through the courts that essentially says that we can't exercise our constitutional rights if we don't have a habitable planet to live on. Seems like a pretty sound argument to me. Now, I am not an attorney, but that sounds like a pretty damn sound argument to me. We're guaranteed certain rights in the Constitution. How are you supposed to pursue life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness if you don't have a habitable planet to live on? That would seem to be kind of a non-starter, would it not? So very creative lawsuit. It has gotten mixed results in the courts, but the courts are taking it more seriously than most legal observers seem to think from the jump. We have a clip here. This is Julia Rock from The Lever, who went on Breaking Points to discuss their coverage of Biden and his administration's continued pushback, if you can believe that, as anyone who's paid the slightest bit of attention obviously can. Their continued pushback against this lawsuit's attempt to basically say that you can't have any constitutional rights without a livable planet. And part of their pushback, you guys, comes because any federal law that helps out big oil or big chemical or big energy or anything will come under scrutiny if this lawsuit were to succeed, because it would essentially then set a precedent that if you're destroying the planet, you are violating everybody's constitutional rights. So it would put into question any sort of policy that contributes to the destruction of the planet. That would mean military actions could be brought to court over constitutional issues. That would mean that any sort of contract or handout or R&D check that's given to Exxon or Chevron or any of the big oil giants would come under question, right? That means responses to things like the BP leak and all those kinds of things. All of this would suddenly come into legal question. So what the federal government has done for a very long time, which is serve those gigantic corporations and then brag about them creating jobs, that would come under legal scrutiny if this lawsuit were to succeed. And in my view, it's a very creative lawsuit, legal argument here, right? So anyway, this is Julia Rock, who went on Breaking Points to discuss some of the details. We'll come back and discuss.
It is time for our weekly partnership segment with The Lever, and joining us to discuss her latest reporting is Julia Rock, a reporter with that outfit. Great to see you, Julia.
Great to see you. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So before we get into this, you guys have announced a new podcast. Let's go ahead and put this up on the screen so people know what it is and where to find it. It's called Lever Time, and it is hosted by David Sirota. Julia, just give us a little bit of a taste of what the podcast will include.
Yeah, I mean, everything from politics to culture. We've sort of framed it as the oppositional podcast to Pod Save America. So listen to that. It'll be basically covering the same issues, but in sort of an opposite direction.
Gotcha. So if you hate the Pod Save Bros, watch this podcast instead. All right, let's get to your reporting. This is the reason why we are so supportive of what you guys do there, because you're always breaking important stories that are getting undercovered or completely ignored by the media. This latest one is a perfect example. Go ahead and put it up on the screen there, guys. You report Biden is preparing to crush a historic climate change lawsuit. A vital effort to establish a legal right to a living planet could soon move forward, but the Biden administration is trying to stop us. Stop it. Give us the backstory here, Julia.
Yeah, so this is a lawsuit that was filed back in 2015 when Obama was president, and the lawsuit is really ambitious. It's seeking to establish a constitutional right to a livable planet. And, you know, the Obama administration and then especially the Trump administration fought tooth and nail to make sure this lawsuit never got a trial. What the plaintiffs want is a trial. So there's sort of a big public discussion of whether there should be a constitutional right to a livable planet. And now that Biden's in office, I think the youth plaintiffs who had filed the suit initially really hoped that there would be sort of a different approach from the Trump administration, and that has not been the case. Biden didn't really come to the table in settlement talks, and now his Justice Department is threatening that if the case gets a ruling to move ahead to a trial, they'll do everything they can to block it.
This seems like kind of a long shot approach, the idea of grounding in the constitutional right to a livable planet, but they have actually gotten some traction in the court system thus far. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, so it certainly is a long shot approach. I don't want to downplay that. But the lawsuit, I think, has seen more success maybe than initially expected, and sort of more than legal observers would have expected. So one of the really big moments for the lawsuit was back in 2016 when a federal judge in Oregon declared, yeah, I have no question that there is a constitutional right to a livable planet. The case was then dismissed in 2020 by a federal circuit court, but even sort of in discussions about the case, the judges didn't question the merits of the claim. They dismissed it on standing grounds, and they sort of made comments to the effect of, well, yes, burning fossil fuels is heating up the planet, and yes, there are sort of questions about whether you could exercise other rights if you aren't living in a livable climate. So I think it has been sort of surprising to observers the extent to which judges have been even open to the types of claims the lawsuit is making. But yeah, especially, that declaration back in 2016 from a federal judge was really the first time any federal judge had even acknowledged that this is a right that might exist.
And so what is the plaintiff's argument specifically about how a right to a livable planet might be derived from our Constitution?
Yeah, so the main part of the argument is rooted in what's known as the public trust doctrine, which dates back to Roman law. It's sort of this old conservative legal principle that sort of the government or the sovereign holds the natural resources of the country in the public trust, and so it can't destroy those resources because those resources sort of belong to the citizens. And what the plaintiff's lawyers will say is, yes, this is an old conservative legal argument we're making, and we're sort of appealing to a conservative bench. The other part of the argument is one that people might be more familiar with, which is this argument that has come up a lot in big constitutional case law, which is that you can't exercise other rights that the Constitution guarantees if you don't first have this thing, and this thing is a livable planet.
And so what would the Biden administration say about why they are opposed to this case moving forward? In what ways would this sort of tie the hands of the administration?
Yeah, so One thing I've seen in a number of cases I've actually reported on where, the Justice Department is opposing something that would be good for a lot of people is they're saying basically we can't do this. Like this is sort of untenable for us. And in this case, if the plaintiffs were successful, in the Supreme Court in declaring that this is a constitutional right that does exist, it would allow every new federal law or government policy to be measured, to face the legal test of, is this going to threaten the future of a livable planet? And that would be a really sweeping change in how federal laws are made, because many laws right now and many things the federal government does, of course, expand fossil fuel infrastructure and are contributing to the warming of the planet.
Yeah, well, it's a very novel and interesting approach to say the least, and also very revealing the way the Biden administration has decided to fight tooth and nail against it. Julia, thank you so much for your analysis and reporting on this.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Our pleasure.
So, it's not necessarily a surprising response from Biden, who obviously ran on climate action to some degree, even though he ran as a centrist and has since turned around and tried to approve more drilling permits and things of this nature throughout his time in office, really taking no substantial steps whatsoever to address the climate crisis. Of course, he would tell you, well, we rejoined the Paris Climate Accord, and it's they do less than the bare minimum, and then they expect credit. And meanwhile, they are fighting in court efforts to actually take substantial steps towards climate action. So, not a surprising response here, but we're going to get into here shortly Biden's response to his tanking in the polls. And this is yet another example of why, when you run on something and say you're going to do something, and not just that, but you also make the case that you, especially in the primary, you make the case that you should be the nominee because you know how to get things done. You guys remember this was like the core piece of his argument too, right? Yeah, Bernie might be right about a lot of things, but he's not going to get them done. So you should vote for me because I know how to get things done. You guys remember this line of argument, right? Now he's had, almost a year and a half, and he's done fuck all about anything at all. Anything. The only positive things, the only tepidly liberal or progressive things that Joe Biden had done lasted a grand total of 1 year before the Democrats allowed it to expire, that being the child tax credit and some small doling out of cash to people in desperate need in the middle of a pandemic. Those things expired, done with, over, and he has refused to replace them or maintain them or anything of the sort, but they want credit. Remember how much credit they wanted for cutting child poverty in half? And then they let that policy expire. So if we're going to give them credit for cutting it in half, shouldn't we also condemn them for then sending those kids right back into fucking poverty? Anyway, this a continuation of that. People are very concerned about the climate, in particular younger generations, who are the exact voters that Joe Biden needs, and he refuses to fucking act. And then he turns around and wonders, why are my numbers so low? I don't understand. And in this case, it's actually even worse because it's not just inaction. Often the Democrats engage in just pure inaction. This is actually worse. He's fighting against the thing he ran on. Right? This lawsuit seeks to actually push forth some action to combat this crisis. And Joe Biden saying, no, I will stand in the way of that lawsuit. Right? We will appeal this in court. We will challenge this. A maintaining of Trump's positions once again. So next time that the Democrats try to sell you on like this, we're the anti-Trump party. No, you're really not. You're really not. You're the anti-Trump party when it's convenient to make social arguments on TV, right? You're the anti-Trump party when it's really easy to sit there and say, well, we support women more than Trump. What do you want, a gold star? Congratulations, right? But anything pertaining to workers' rights, anything pertaining to the climate, anything pertaining to social issues or the social safety net or providing basic services to people like leftists pretty much all want to do, anything about any of that stuff is just cast aside while they want credit for saying, well, but we're not as transphobic as Trump. Don't you want to give us credit, right? Now, again, I don't mean to at all minimize those social issues, which are of desperate importance. I really don't. But you see how their rhetoric, their electoral strategies crumble when you actually apply some context here, where Biden maintains Trump's policies on immigration, on the climate, right, on the justice system. He's giving out more subsidies to police than Donald Trump did, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So in this case, it's even worse than inaction. It's action in the wrong direction. Democrats, once again, disappointing and reneging on promises and then expecting the voters not to fucking notice and acting all shocked when the voters happen to notice that they're not doing any of the things that they ran on. And in many ways, they are simply maintaining Trump's policies and Trump's America.